as well as gun micromechanics like active reload and railguns that have a sweet spot on their charge timers for extra damage.
No. Wrong. I take it back. I take it all back. I hadn't even tested some of these things back then. Let's reel it in. I'll admit it, I was overconfident. Confidence isn't a bad thing, but too much of any one thing can become a problem. It was actually back in February when I was beginning to lose confidence. I was testing the game and I was finding that it wasn't fun. All you folks who don't buy in for flight games, my game had all the most damning flaws of the genre. You feel like you're trying to turn towards enemies far too often. Falling out of the sky at 0 speed feels like stalling out. Not only these, but all the things that I wanted to do were sort of at odds with each other. This isn't a new problem for indie devs. I've watched a bunch of videos that say as much. Make smaller games. Don't try to do everything. Well, that was what I was trying to adhere to. But despite best intentions, we often fail to learn from others' mistakes as humans, right? So I got some folks to play the game. And I learned where my game's true strengths lie, and which of my grand ideas didn't fit into the profile of fun. Take everything I say in this devlog, and those going forward, with a grain of salt, because everything, as always, is subject to change. I want to be a bit more intentional here in separating the game's inspirations from its core identity, and the contributors to that. Easiest off the list, Halo 3. I removed the grenade mechanic. My game won't have the motion sensor from Halo 3, so you lose some of that contextual data of having enemies behind you. Part of my grand vision was that you could throw grenades at walls to kill pursuers. I thought that would be interesting. Not only do my AI not pursue so intensely that they stay behind the player for a myriad of feels bad reasons, but it's also hard to convey information behind a player when they are moving so fast as they are in my game. Especially in ways that wouldn't distract them from focusing on flying the airplane and worrying about what's in front of them. To make it work as I had envisioned would take a lot of work for a thing I don't think many players would have interfaced with. We're still working on the Banshee ground scrape, but I feel like that's more of an inspiration category type thing. Next is Project Sylpheed. I have this Hostile Waters strategy guide, and reading through it, I realized that Hostile Waters already had large external weapons. We can put Project Sylpheed in that category of inspiration because it is another game that does this, though neither has as much weapon representation as my game. This game will no longer be really considered a third-person shooter from a mechanics perspective. One could argue it's still visually that. So the idea of having tight shooting, a la Halo 3 and Fortnite, doesn't work. Visual interest for the weapons is still there, but a bit more tertiary, and certainly an inspiration taken from FPS and third-person shooter games. Fortnite just gave me the idea, but that's what it is, an inspiration, not identity. Battle Shapers was what brought into focus my want to have melee in the game, and mechanically how my railgun, the Vallestrap, works. But to be honest, the melee is taking a bit of a reduced role in the design space, mostly due to the aforementioned hard to display information behind you. The game currently has a dash charge attack, but displaying the information of what happened behind you is a bit hard. It may stay if I decide to have melee attacks trigger hit markers and maybe do a kill feed, but we'll see. The Vallestrap does use the radial charging, but this is more inspiration than identity at this point. Star Fox still provides its wiggle targeting as a sort of inspiration, but mechanically the aim from hip offers little to none. And the missiles do not operate or feel like those in Wingman or Ace anymore. The flying feels closest to Ace and Wingman. So we'll keep Wingman in the Venn diagram because it's more gun-centric, which is closer to the vision of my game. We'll replace Star Fox with Dark Souls because the game is a Souls-like now. There's a big piece about Z targeting. More on that after the cut. So we're left with a new identity for the game. Number 1, aim down sights. It was replaced with zoom while locked on to let the weapons still shine so you can still admire their animations. Number 2, lock on. It was a mess. It emulated Ace and had bad cycling. It was all clumsy, and its implementation was never complete in the first place. Number 3, drift. I took this one off a dedicated button and have it toggle when you lock on now. It works fine if there's no enemy to focus on either, so it can still be used in traversal sections. Number 4, VTOL is removed. It wasn't as fun as the base flight model. I'll probably have some enemies still do this because it could be interesting to face off against them, but from a player standpoint, it wasn't the strongest thing. Number 5, Sky Boundary. I played Diddy Kong Racing, and I thought this was a good idea. So there was a natural barrier at a certain altitude. It's not a good idea, and I did a bad job implementing it. Better to drive players with a carrot than a stick. So now there's no boundary, and players should be drawn to objectives for the fun factor, since nothing is going on in the opposite direction. Number 6. There was a gravity application at speed 0, we called this glide speed, that made the airplane fall out of the sky, gliding towards the ground. Things like stall and anything that makes you drop out of the sky is just not fun, and it couldn't really be used skillfully like I had hoped, so I removed it. This is an arcade game. We're not worried about real physics, and what I had implemented was a weak adaptation of real physics to begin with. Number 7, variable weapons. They had to go. With the limited attack windows for high-speed craft, it was just slow and led players to not swapping to the nose weapon. The two weapons were meant to complement one another, but it just didn't work in practice. Might add a spell for this later, but yeah. Number 8, missiles. I replaced these with spells. Aesthetically, this is a lot cooler. Mechanically, it's easier for me to make work with my current workflows. The spells are fairly automated, either seeking foes automatically or going after the foe you are locked onto. Number 9, drift cam. I've improved the drift perspective and visual. It's focused more on what it needs to be for the game, which is combat rather than movement, reinforcing some of the ideas that this is a shooter game and not a driving, a flying game, if you will. Following the creation of a level and subsequent playtest, I've settled with confidence on a direction for the game. We've abandoned the true first-person shooter combat idea due to complexity and lack of fun and engagement, and overall just frustration while playing. The game, while playing in the first-person model, was becoming exhausting a lot because you were having to chase those targets off screen in an infinite turn. You were having to try to line up shots that were incredibly difficult and became more so when the enemy changed direction. We're now focusing on a Souls-like Z targeting system, maybe even adding an Estus flask. Further study will go into the melee combat to see if it can stay. It will remain relevant for enemies, contingent on if proper feedback can be given. I think it may still have something to offer to the game. Lock-on becomes a major feature. Drift has a sweeping change from movement focus to killing enemy focus. Overall general scope shrink, and a new narrative outline. I'm presenting this chart from what I have logged and from my memory as work hours on the game. You can see I put in a lot of time at the start and sort of fall off. Most of year 1, as depicted by the blue line, is spent on aesthetics and designing aircraft. Some of these months with low hours was because I was working a full-time job. All I did was model and animate in Blender. Year 1 could be described as the Blender year. Any peaks were where I was implementing into Unreal Engine 5. Of particular note, January, when I was designing the drift, is a peak. June and July, when I tried and failed to implement Voxel Driver into the project, is another peak. And going into October, when I was getting out of the Marine Corps, is another peak because I wasn't working as much. Honorable mention goes to learning Ableton and some of these added work hours. Year 2 is the year of Unreal Engine 5, and I've learned a lot during this year. It's depicted in orange. I went full-time halfway through February, and as a result have been able to rapidly prototype and finally settle on the concept of the game in March. I think March and April have been the most formative, as I participated in a game jam, which taught me a lot of good lessons. April was when I completed and received feedback from players on the game, and is largely the pivot point from where all of the changes derived. There's a bit of a dip in May, which is speculative mostly. May is not over, and I've found that this month I've been working shorter weeks but accomplishing more. So I will likely try to hold this trend, and I think the dip doesn't suggest a loss of productivity here like the one from January to June in year one. Special thanks to my friend Avery for the idea of projecting my game work hours after participating in a quarterly review he put on for his project about a month ago. Also, special thanks to Nate and Jacob, who were pivotal to getting me this far in my game's development from its inception. Seriously, you guys, I wouldn't know where to even start with Unreal Engine 5 and wouldn't have made it this far without you. For a personal update, I will be working on the game full-time until I begin school for game design in September this year. I expect my work on Helios Stratos to be about half the amount I currently spend on it. So a little above year one, a little below year two's first 2 quarters. I intend to do a bit of tutorializing and perhaps make videos for the technical aspects of the game later on. Those won't be a part of the devlog anymore, so sorry if you came here for those. Expect the devlogs to mostly be wave tops. Okay, and so on a final note, the narrative. I adjusted the narrative to be quite a bit less grandiose and to not require such a verbose lore. Simply put, the story now centers on a supernatural instance where the protagonist gains what is essentially a cheat skill to the conventional understanding of the world's magic system, the ability to respawn. The protagonist views this as a curse, and they are pressed into service almost immediately after. They become the premier pilot of a special operations archaeological unit. Kind of a mouthful and a weird thing, but it makes sense in the vein of my game. The story now takes place terrestrially, but I've made new visuals to make space feel very close. That's all for now. Thanks for tuning into this devlog. Okay. Give me your feet. Look at this criminal guy. Look at the camera. Look at the camera, little criminal. Look at the camera. Oh, what a crimer. Okay. Get you out of here.